Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlecoff to get notified when I go live.
What is going on, everybody? John Middlecoff, 3 and Out podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you may listen. If you're watching this on the Volumes YouTube page, make sure you hammer that like button, subscribe to the page. As you can see, I'm wearing a new Volume hat. Go to thevolume.com, check out the merch. Hammer one of these hats, 3 and Out hats. Just go to thevolume.com, search the merch. We will talk about Saquon Barkley and some of the running backs whose franchise situation is still in flux. And then a couple quick thoughts on the Pat Fitzgerald situation at Northwestern, where he was fired a couple days ago. Then we will do a mailbag at John Middlecoff as the Instagram, fire in those DMs. But first, can I tell you about my friends at Game Time? Go to your smartphone right here and download the Game Time app. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in America, and it's the official ticketing app of this podcast. Just download it, and when you do, you want to go to any game, any concert, any comedy show, type in the promo code JOHN, that's JOHN, promo code JOHN, and get $20 off any pair of tickets. So you want to go to a baseball game, you want to go to any football game, obviously concerts. I'm going to a concert in 3 or 4 days. Can't freaking wait, and I'm doing it because of my friends at Game Time. I use the promo code, $20 off. Couldn't have done it without them. Best ticketing app in America. Use them, and use them now. Promo code John. Hey, let's get into Saquon Barkley. And this is one where me and the former player / media are not on the same page. I just don't fall under the umbrella of always, oh, you got to pay him. Pay him. He's getting screwed. Like, not everybody in life, and definitely in pro sports, is always getting screwed by the quote-unquote man. And in this situation, I've been pretty adamant that I think it's been a lucrative partnership for Saquon, right? He hasn't been underpaid when you factor in how many games he's played over the years and how much money he made because of where he was drafted and then his 5th-year option and even this franchise tag. If he were to play on this franchise tag, he will have averaged over his first 6 years $8 million a year, right? And to me, for what he gave, when you factor in the injuries, I think it's been pretty lucrative for the guy, right? And here's the other thing. There was a contract signed early in the morning. I saw it pop up on my phone that Quinnen Williams, the highly drafted defensive lineman from Alabama for the New York Jets, was given a large extension. I think well over $60 million. 90 plus non-guaranteed, right? And not a soul is going to go, yeah, dumb deal. Every single person's like, would have done it. No brainer. Defensive lineman. Whenever Nick Bosa gets paid, it's like, yeah, would have done it too. Micah Parsons, those type players, no one even hesitates. Yet every time with a running back, it's like, oof, wouldn't have done that. Isn't there a point where in any line of work where if the business deal on one side goes, God, it's one thing to have a risk. Any business deal, whether you're buying a house, whether you're buying a car, whether you're investing in a running back or defensive lineman, has risk, right? Paying Aaron Judge after a historic season has risk. You have to do it. Paying Bryce Harper $300 million is risky. You have to do it. It's a no-brainer. To me, it's one thing to be a no-brainer, and it's another thing to like be close to on the fence. Is this a good idea? And I think every running back falls under that category. And I think Josh Jacobs, who's a really, really good player, who is a guy you would want on your team. Can you give him a 4-year contract of $30 to $40 million guaranteed? How can anyone agree that that is good business? He's been hurt countless times in his career. Same with Saquon Barkley. Tony Pollard looked freaking awesome last year. How did season end? Ankle shattered. Now, I understand on their side why you would want to get the long-term contract. There's a lot of risk in playing running back. But how can the universal thinking or thought process when it comes to the position go, can't pay him, can't pay him? And every time a guy that's kind of good or is a good player comes up, it's like, oh, they got to do it. Why? I just don't understand it. And listen, I saw Albert Breer today with Coward on TV. He said, this really signals to the locker room they take care of the players. This isn't the NBA. This isn't professional baseball. There's like a 30 to 40% churn in every NFL team every single year. You lose countless players all the time. Now, I understand Saquon, high character guy. They like him. He represents the franchise well. He's good in the market. I'm not saying he's not valuable. I don't actually care how much money these guys make. Like, I'm not coming at it from like, I think these guys make too much. Like, the chemistry teacher deserves as much as the starting pitcher. It's like, no, she can't throw 100. She can't win games for the Yankees, right? That's not what I'm saying. But in a salary cap league and in a league where it's very, very hard to find tackles and edge rushers and quarterbacks, right? Hell, I can find wide receivers. I might not be able to get Jamar Chase, but can I get CeeDee Lamb? Can I get Deebo Samuel? Right? I get A.J. Brown on the trade block. I can get DK Metcalf at the end of the second round. Well, no position beside like interior offensive linemen that no one actually cares about. Not that they don't matter on your team. I'm just saying, no, we don't spend much time talking about guards and centers in this business. Running back is a position that we talk about a lot, right? It's usually, I'm not a huge fantasy football guy, but they're usually the number one picks in fantasy football. They've been one of the most famous positions in the history of the sport. And for a large percentage of the time, they were the most important guy on offense, right? Definitely in like the 70s. Probably started shifting a little bit in the 80s. But when I was a kid, I mean, Barry Sanders and Emmitt Smith were every bit as big as like Brett Favre and Troy Aikman. I'm not saying they were as important. You could make that argument really for Emmitt for a period of time, but you could also say they had such a good offensive line. But my point is that they're a very famous position. They're also a very replaceable position. And I completely understand locker room dynamics. And I'm not saying like just screw Saquon Barkley, but I don't think I would, but he wants $16 million. They're willing to offer him $13 million. $13 million over how many years? How much do we have to guarantee? Because I'll promise you this, if you give him a 5-year deal at well over $60 million, and it's a $40+ million guaranteed, from an economic standpoint, I'm sorry, that's just bad business. It really is. And here's the other thing. Everyone's like, well, they gave Daniel Jones all that money, 15 touchdowns. It is much more difficult to find a quarterback. That is not debatable, right? Is Daniel Jones an $80+ million guaranteed, given what we've seen throughout his career? Of course not. Does his position make it much more difficult for anyone to pivot? 100%. The other thing is, it's not like they suck last year. Who were they? They were drafting in the 20s. They made the playoffs. They won a playoff game. He is not a replaceable player. And you can argue on this given team, Saquon's not a replaceable player. Okay, play on the franchise tag. I would not budge on any of these guys on the franchise tag unless, okay, you want 15, can I give you a 2-year, $28 million deal? I'll guarantee every penny. Teams don't like to do that because of the way it messes with your salary cap. It's why they like doing the longer-term deals, which are very easy when you get a Quinnen Williams or a Nick Bosa, because you can amortize it over the salary cap. Well, the way you want to do it with a running back and the amount of money they want, it becomes difficult. It's easy to sign a guard like 2 years, $10 million. It's much harder once that number gets closer to $15+ million, and you want to keep it short. They want to keep it long. These are complicated. But this notion that they have to prove something to the locker room, or they couldn't figure out how to operate if Saquon hasn't been around. Like, he hasn't been around at points in time of his career because he gets injured. And that is the main concern with this position, beside that how easy it is to find a starter on the third day of the draft. How many guys start in the NFL that are undrafted free agents at the position? It's why most really good tackles get drafted pretty high. You can look all over the league, guards and centers, find 5th-round picks, 7th-round picks, undrafted free agents. There's not many Trent Williams that aren't 1st-round picks. It's what makes the Eagles situation so crazy. They got a rugby player in the 7th round, and they molded him to a star tackle. But he had to beat out and ultimately take out a 1st-round pick in Andre Dillard and replace Jason Peters, who was a premium player, who ironically I think also was an undrafted free agent. But these are outlier situations. So I just never understand, like, this guy's getting screwed when he's made a lot of money. And the franchise tag pays a premium. Speaking of running backs, I listened to Brad Holmes, the general manager, who has a fascinating story with Peter Schrager on his podcast. Talked about how he broke into the NFL as a PR guy. And then, but mainly one thing that stood out to me about the conversation is he discussed the draft this year. And they talked about taking a running back really high. And how, most people's reaction was he was a village idiot. You can't make that move. And this gets back to the running back situation with Saquon, Jacobs, Pollard. the most valuable time for one of these running backs now, especially if you are going to draft a guy relatively high, is their rookie contract. It's no different with the quarterback. It's the easiest time to build your team. The difference is, even once I have to pay Mahomes, or once I have to pay Herbert, or once I have to pay Joe Burrow, I still feel pretty confident about my ability to compete. Once I had to pay Zeke, it was a problem on my salary cap. Todd Gurley, once I had to pay Todd Gurley and he wasn't the same guy, it becomes a major, major issue. Because that amount of money, when he becomes, like instead of being an 8 out of 10, a 2 out of 10, it limits my ability to just sign other solid positions, right? Because I can sign a guard for $3 million. I can sign a safety for $4 million. Like that adds up really, really fast. And he discussed, it was fascinating because he goes, listen, everyone makes this big deal about how you got to take a premium position high. It's not as much about the position as it is the player. He's like, I was with the Rams when we had the number 2 overall pick in 2014. We took Greg Robinson because you got to take a tackle high. How'd that one work out? And it is true, right? So I'm a big believer in going with the big heavies up front, taking a D lineman or taking an offensive lineman, more often than not a tackle, right? High in the draft. But you have to have the right player to pick. Like there's a big difference between like Penei Sewell or Lane Johnson and some guy who's going to suck. And this is where the scouting elements of it are. It's not easy. This is not an exact science, right? It's an inexact science for a reason. You're dealing with human beings. And now you're dealing with the difference of offenses in college have never been more different than a lot of the things that you're doing in the NFL, especially when it comes to offensive linemen. So his whole point, and the other thing I'm glad he said this is, this draft sucked, right? This draft was not good. Do you want to have a 7.2% interest rate on the mortgage? Of course not. But what if you get a house right now for $300,000 less than it was a year ago? You got to think about it, right? Do you want to spend it 7% on a home when that home is $200,000 more than it was 6 months ago? Yeah, probably not. But getting the right player is what matters. Getting value based on the circumstances matters. And this kid, who they're very, very high on, you listen to him like this was one of his favorite players in the draft. And then the other players surrounding him were not very good. So in a loaded draft, where it viewed like, hey, you could have got a sweet starter defensive tackle. You could have got some awesome corner. Like I would understand it, but that's not how people in the league viewed this thing. I would imagine you could find some teams that might not have had 10 first-round picks, let alone 15. I would say if we did on average, if I had to take an educated guess, that number would be between 12 and 13. Guys in this draft graded with a first-round grade. So when you find yourself in a situation like that, I think you can just take the guy who you think is the best player, even if that is a running back, is a center, is a linebacker. I never understand the thing with linebackers, right? Because I think linebackers come under the umbrella a lot like running backs, is you can find really good guys in the middle of the drafts. And that's true, right? Fred Warner, 3rd round pick. A lot of guys throughout the NFL who are starting middle linebackers were not top 15 picks. But once you get Fred Warner, like if there is a guy in the draft, like when Roquan was coming out, and you view him as an impact starter at that position impacts the game dramatically. The 3-down linebackers, their ability to make every tackle in the run game, their ability to cover tight ends, and if you, depending on what type of defense you run, just their ability to run around in zone and make plays is like they never come off the field. And when you look at the stat sheet when the game ends, like, they got 14 tackles, they had a PBU, and they set the physical tone for my team. So if this guy is an impact running back, it's a no-brainer. Now, back to what we talked about to start the show, where it becomes complicated is the second contract. I love that first contract if he's a good player. Second contract, I'm sorry, I probably move on. And last but not least, the Pat Fitzgerald situation. I've been privy to know guys in the NFL, players, coaches, and executives that worked and played for Pat Fitzgerald. And some of those individuals fall under, I would say, the higher character guys I know in my life. And they don't just throw out bullshit. And hell, I even know people that didn't work or play for him. People, I know that Howie Roseman loved the guy. Like Pat Fitzgerald isn't just highly thought of. He is viewed as like the cream of the crop when it comes to character, running a program, just as an overall individual. I'm even separating that from football. So when I saw a couple days ago that he was fired, I went, what's the point of multiple decades worth of equity in life? Like, he's proven over and over and over again to be just a high-level guy, a trustworthy individual, someone that NFL teams at Northwestern were begging him to take their job. And someone texted me this week that said, if Pat Fitzgerald can go down in this business, everyone can. Because it's a industry full of sketchy, questionable characters. And I understand when Lane got fired back in the day at USC, or Sark with the drinking issues, or Hugh Freeze, their equity at a place wasn't that long. This guy played there. He coached his entire career there. And for the last 17 years, every single day has represented the football program, the university, and has done it as well, if not better. I'm just talking from a character representation standpoint. If you want to fire someone in sports based on the field or on the court, totally get it. He went 1-11 last year. If you fired him because you lost your fastball, you're not a good coach, so is the business. That's the way the cookie crumbles when it comes to football, right? You win or you lose. But part of the reason at 1-11 there was zero talk about him getting fired was because of the equity that he has built up. So when a story comes out in the school newspaper, of course the media is going to love it, right? 90% of them went to school there. They all started at that school newspaper. And people like me, journalism's kind of dying. They hate that. And so when this happens, and then you read it's like anonymous sources. Now, he got put on suspension because of, I listened to Stuart Mandel on some, not Stuart Mandel, but Dan Wetzel. This was an investigation that started back, I think, at the beginning of December. So this was something that just didn't come to fruition a week ago, right? So this was something, and they suspended him for 2 weeks. But you can see the modern day snowball effect that a 4-string guy who eventually put his name on it because they were anonymous sources. And rumors are that this guy had a vendetta out for the guy for a long period of time. And I just don't understand the point of life equity anymore. If a guy like Pat Fitzgerald can conduct himself, can operate at a program for that, it's not 5 years. It's not even 10. It's 17 fucking years of proven over and over and over of just being a high-level guy who's beloved in the industry, who's just held in the highest regard when it comes to being a person, when it comes to the way he coaches, when it comes to just his overall program and how he represents the university. That just something that becomes a little he said, she said, and he's immediately fired. So I see a lot of people going, well, of course he's suing, he got fired for cause. No, he's suing because he thinks he's got railroaded. He got screwed. And I think these situations, it's just a very, very slippery slope. And I wasn't there. Everyone listening, you guys probably weren't there unless you played there. I don't pretend to know all the details of what actually happened, but this one feels a little weird to me. I have a hard time thinking that this guy was just running some renegade program on the side, and it was just some kind of asshole to certain people. He's a coach, so sometimes they're hard on people. Welcome to the sport of football. But this notion that you can spend all this time, all that loyalty, it also shows you why when you get the opportunity in life to upgrade, there's an element of loyalty when you are emotionally tied to someone professionally, right? He played there. But think how many times, whether it be better universities, whether it be NFL jobs, he said no. He turned down to ultimately be fired by the place that loved him the most, because when the fire really got hot, they turned on him. They didn't trust the guy who had given them 17 years worth of reasons to trust him. Just, to me, a crazy story with just kind of a sad ending.